Foundation. Once again, I'm Mike Holmes, the chairman of the board there, and we thank you for joining us. We had a great turnout and a great session with Chuck DeBellevue at our last one. We're very fortunate and honored to have Lieutenant General retired Tex Brown with us today. Tex finished college, jumped into the Sky Raider and went straight to Vietnam, and you're going to hear some stories about that time. After Vietnam, he made his way into the F-16, led squadrons and wings, and his last two jobs, I think, were running the Air Force Personnel Center and being the head of all Air Force personnel. So a great career with a great start. I will tell you that our next one is scheduled right now. We're targeting the 19th of July. Our guest will be Colonel Fred Watkins, who is an F-105 pilot, as we try to kind of cover the spectrum of Vietnam air activities. Once again, thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to hearing from Tex, and I'll hand it off to Matt to get us started.
Well, thank you, sir. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here tonight. A new feature, and I'm just getting used to this myself. If you look down at the very bottom of your screen down there, there should be next to the chat bar, I'm told, there's going to be a question and answer tab that'll pop up down there. And then if you have a question, you can simply submit it down there or in the chat. But welcome, everybody, to War Stories tonight. And of course, to Lieutenant General Richard Tex Brown. Thanks for being here.
You bet.
You're hanging out at General Holmes's house down there. You got all those great guitars in the back. We were talking there before we started out about your brief music career in the Air Force there, where you with one of your buddies. We'll have to recount that story tonight. But let's get started. You flew one of the coolest airplanes, I think, in the Air Force inventory. I mean, right up there with so many of the greats, but the Sky Raider, and flying such a critical mission there with close air support. But I got to ask, can you tell me about the airplane? Because as a wingnut, that is just such a great machine, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as we kick things off tonight.
Well, thank you, Matt. And I'll tell you, it may be the reason I ended up making a career in the Air Force, because I did not join the Air Force planning on making a career. I was a draft dodger. I was in college in 1968 in my sophomore year. I was at TCU playing baseball, and the draft system turned into a lottery. And I'll never forget the first night of the lottery. It was on TV. We all sat around and watched it, and I was a double-digit midget. I was number 88. And if you were inside about 160 or 170, depending on your individual draft board, you could expect to be drafted. I was in college, so I expected to still have the college deferment, but the Army would grab you, get you into, and even though you were deferred, the moment you weren't a full-time student, I was going to end up in the rice paddies of Vietnam. So literally, to avoid being drafted in the Army, I had a couple of fraternity brothers who were real brothers, and they were both Air Force brats, if you will. They'd grown up in the Air Force. And they were both in Air Force flying. And they go, Brown, you got good eyes. You could fly jets. You've got to go Air Force. I'd had a godfather who'd flown in World War II as a fighter pilot. And so he was a bit of an influence. I found myself going down the Air Force ROTC unit, joining up, getting in the 2-year program. And then I went to pilot training, and I went down to Laredo Air Force Base. I showed up one day after graduation from college. There was a class that started that Monday, or I have to wait like 3 months. I said, put me in, coach. Put me in right now. I want to. And so I went right now, didn't waste any time at all. I went straight to pilot training. 1 year later, graduated. And our class was the class right before the academy class. I was a 7108. I don't know what that means to people today, but and the 01 classes were typically the class full of a lot of academy grads. So I'm in class with a few other ROTC, mostly OTS, and just kind of a hodgepodge of guys who'd signed up to join the Air Force and go to pilot training. But we did not have a real great drop a year later. We had one F4, one A7, and actually that was the guard unit, and the guy was already destined to go there. And we had the Sky Raider. Well, I was actually in a class of guys who were also not necessarily trying to make a career. The number one guy in our class had 3,000 hours of airline time, and he was avoiding being drafted. So he graduated number one. I mean, he had great hands. And you could choose, back then you could choose the airplane of choice if you were #1 grad. He chose a C9. And so off he went to fly the C9, which was equivalent to the civilian airplane he'd flown. I think the next guy took the F4. A couple of guys wanted to stay in ATC, didn't want to go. And so I think I was #5 in my class, and I got the A1 Skyraider. Now, the idea of flying an old reciprocating piston driven here, I mean, I was gone through jet pilot training, T-37, T-38. We were a jet Air Force. We really weren't a reciprocating Air Force. What few prop airplanes, mostly were turboprops, but we had this old airplane that was a World War II, built at the end of World War II, saw time in Korea, was put in mothballs, literally pulled out of the boneyard at Davis-Monthan, and then put into service in Vietnam, because it truly was a tremendous airplane for close air support, for flying low and slow, loiter time, stay on station. Well, I'd heard about it. I didn't know a whole lot about it. But once I got the assignment, I wanted to get there as fast as I could, because I also was being told every year the Air Force was we're gonna close this thing down. We aren't into flying prop. We're a jet Air Force. So the powers that be, there was political pressures to shut down the Skyraider business, but it was just too effective. So the Army generals and leaders, as well as those that would report back through the war fight, said, we got to have this airplane because it's doing a great job. So I got into the Skyraider. I went to Hurlburt for 3 months of training. I didn't take any leave. I just did whatever I needed to immediately to get to the war zone. I got there in October of '71. I remember showing up. Now I've got maybe 40 hours in the airplane, enough to kind of be dangerous. At least what I remember most was 4-bladed prop, 3350 radial engine, 3,000 horsepower. I think it still is the biggest radial engine that was ever made, 18 cylinders. You start the engine, you typically, if you hadn't backfired it, you will. So that's going to cost you a case of beer. If you haven't ground looped it, you will, because sometime taxing, that tail, you will forget to lock the tail wheel, and the torque on that engine will make that airplane just literally do a ground loop. I'd had all those experiences, but I got to Vietnam, and I ended up spending a year to the day, and loved flying the airplane. Now you had to control mixture, you had to control the prop. Those are things you didn't deal with in a jet. You had to worry about torque. It's pretty well known that most Skyraider pilots, their left leg gets real strong, because if you don't put rudder in at the right time, that airplane will get away from you. And if it's on the ground, it's going to ground loop. If it's in the air, it could roll on you. So it was a challenge to fly, but it was probably the greatest year of my life. And I think I stayed for 35 years because I kept trying to see if I couldn't have another year like that one.
We're going to talk about that year tonight, your year in South, well, I should just say in Vietnam there, right over the top of the country. You said something to me, and I know a lot of F4 pilots, and they all loved what you guys did in the Skyraider. I mean, they were so grateful that you were there. But you said to me, I couldn't buy a drink in an Army bar when I came home, and you probably still can't. The guys on the ground, when they saw the Skyraider, they knew that that you were up there and overhead. And I guess for that matter, I've heard it with the loiter time that the guys that were fighting us were not real happy when it showed up either. I mean, that was not something that they wanted to see in theater. But talk to me about some of those missions, because you were there for a whole lot of that. And by the numbers, when it comes to the decorations that you've received, they just tell that story all too well. Would you mind sharing with us tonight?
Okay.
Some of those.
The thing about the Skyraider is it weighed 12,000 pounds empty. we could carry about 12,000 pounds worth of either ordnance or fuel. So you could carry your weight. Now you just lumbered off the ground and you kind of flew maybe just 20 knots above a stall speed until you burned off some fuel, and then you could gain a little more speed. And I know when I get up on station or go work in a troop in contact or close air support, I mean, CAS was our primary mission. Occasionally, a lot of guys in Vietnam felt like they didn't really accomplish much. They go work a target, and it might feel like a tree park, or, well, we felt like we were accomplishing because we were either working with a forward air controller, or we might even be talking directly to the ground fac with the Army or the Marine Corps guys on the ground, and they're in what's called a TIC, troops in contact. And if it's troops in contact, that means the enemy and the good guys are at least within 100 meters of each other. They're in true contact. Well, you can't bring an airplane that might throw the bombs all over the ground or all over the sky. So you need something that is either very accurate or very slow. Well, we were real slow, and so that's why it was appreciated when we showed up, because they knew we had a lot of ordnance. We had a lot of fuel, and we were low and slow when we were going to get right in amongst them. Now, we were in a fairly benign environment from a standpoint of air defenses, SAMs, I spent time in Europe later, and the World War III scenario, flying the F-16, the folded gap scenario, that is not a benign environment. So,
well, I read that and I hear what you're saying, but I mean, when I read stuff about you, I mean, there was one account, 240 bullet holes.
Now I say benign in that we're not worried about SAMs and
okay,
and air-to-air threat, at least when we were flying in the South. I did fly about 20, 30 missions in the North, and there we had to worry about SAMs, had to worry about MiGs. So the way we defeated that was as fast and as low as we could be. So we flew below radars, and now down south, we had to worry about AAA, maybe ground fire. The time I had 230 or 40 holes in the airplane, a lot of those were rifle, just AK-47 or small arms, because that was on a search and rescue. I spent my first 6 months flying close air support, TIC. The last 6 months I spent mostly flying Sandy missions as search and rescue. Now, when we had a downed airman on the ground of any type, Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine, we're going to rescue the fellow American. And so the Sandys would be the first ones usually on scene to identify, confirm who he is, we use the term sanitize the area. What that really means is kill all the bad guys that you can, to make it safe enough for a helicopter to come in and pick him up. So we were the Jolly Green's best friends, because we were the ones to protect them. If that survivor, when he's on the ground, and let's face it, if you've been shot down, that's not a comfortable spot to be in. And the last thing you want to do is be captured. When you hear the Sandy call sign show up, and then you hear this big old radial engine come overhead, that's a pretty good feeling. So that was a tremendous part of our mission, and the most rewarding. And now we took some hits doing that. But,
yeah, 13 successful missions there for recoveries, and all of those are special. Would you mind sharing one of them with us that stands out in your mind?
Yeah, it's funny. My wife will tell you, I can't remember what she wore to church last week. And yet then I can talk about a mission 50 years ago and go into almost tremendous detail about that very mission. She says, what is it about your memory? It must be adrenaline, or maybe it's emotion. I can. There was one mission called Lady Ace. It was a Marine helicopter crew They had taken a bunch of hits. It was right at the about 3 months into the Tet offensive of 1972. So the time frame is July 72. They're on a mission near a place called Quang Tri. Quang Tri is in South Vietnam, south of Hue, a little bit south of DMZ. It had been a good guy city, but it had been overrun by Viet Cong. And we don't know within Quang Tri whether they're good or bad. There's mixed. You just can't take them all out because there's a bunch of good people. There's a bunch of South Vietnamese real allies there, as well as villagers. They this Marine helicopter auto rotates down, crash lands. There's a 6-man crew. 5 are okay. One's burned pretty bad, but they get out of the helicopter. It burns up. They kind of form a little firefight, and they jump on radios. I'm sitting alert at Da Nang, which is probably 60, 70, 80 miles south of where they are. We get scrambled, my wingman and I. I'm a fairly experienced Sandy at the time. I'm a lieutenant. I got a captain who's my wingman, but he's not as experienced. So he's the wingman, I'm the flight lead. But in the air, it's lead and wing. It has nothing to do with rank. And so we go in there, we find these guys, and they're easy to find. Fly over the top of them a couple of times, and they're describing to me where they're receiving ground fire, and it's from all directions. Well, I really can't make out exact, so we have to wait till we get shot at. So I actually start what's called trolling for ground fire. Now, we're not supposed to do that, but in a search and rescue, everything is legal. In a normal mission, I would have, squadron commander would have had me for that. So I'm trolling for ground fire. I'm down low, and I keep making these low passes, waiting for somebody to shoot at me. I got my wingman who's up at 10,000 feet, and he's up above, and he's watching, and he could see when something gets shot, and we roll in and take that out. Well, we did this for 2 or 3 hours. In the meantime, I don't know it, but I'm taking a lot of hits. I actually had 2 Strellas shot at me that day. That Maz is my wingman. Now, Maz is one of my best friends today, Lee Mazzarella. I was best man's wedding when we came home. And Maz called out that Strela shot. Now, Strela was a handheld surface-to-air missile. It was a fairly new weapon. It had just been introduced on the 1st of May. We lost 4 airplanes in 2 days on May 1 and May 2 to Strelas. We didn't know what it was. It shot the engine right off the front of the Sky Raider. All 4 of those guys jumped out and were rescued, but we lost 4 airplanes. Well, then we were required to jack up to 8,000 feet on a normal mission because of the Strela. On SAR, you do what you got to do. I was down low, Strela's shot, Maz sees it, calls for a break. I brake hard left, and the Strela goes right by my canopy. And that happened twice. So the point of all that is after about 2.5 hours on station, flying, trolling for ground fire, it was starting to get dark. I had Jolly Green sitting feet wet. They're just 30 miles off the coast. But there was no way I could safely bring a Jolly Green into this environment and ensure that he would get, because he can't dodge a Strela. If a Strela shot at him, he's done. And I'm about to tell the Marine crew on the ground, well, you guys need to, button up for overnight. I'll come back in the morning. And because we did things in that day and age. Now, since then, we've owned the night as an Air Force, but we rescued during the day. We didn't do anything at night. I was about to, I still got fuel on board. I was about to leave when up on Guard Freak comes this voice. And he says, hey, Sandy, this is, I think it was Blue Ghost. We're down here a little south of where you are. This is our area. We're Army guys, and we got 2 Loaches, 2 Slicks, and 2 Cobras. And we kind of work this area, but we've been listening. How far off of Highway 1 going into Quang Tri? So I described where the Marine crew is, and it's just right above this dry riverbed that runs right beside Highway 1 north-south. He says, man, I know exactly where that is. I think we can get there and get these guys out. This is the It's like the back of our hand. He said, "Why don't you stay above us? I'll meet you at," and we pick a point on the down south of the driver bed, 2 miles from where the survivors are. And they come in real low. I mean, they're just kicking up dust. They're so low. Mazzarella and I fly above them at about 1,500 feet. And to stay with them, we kind of do an S turn like this over the top of them as they're running in. Now they are on the deck and I can barely see them. I told Mazzarella, we're going to go Christmas, which means we're going to turn all our lights on. It's now dark enough. Matt says, "Turn on our lights." I said, "Yeah, I want them shooting at us, not these guys. We're at 1,500 feet. And we see some small arms. You can see the tracers coming up like this. They're shooting at us. These guys run in. The slicks go into a hover or actually land. They put these guys on there. They're in and out of there in 30 seconds. They come out the same way they went in. Once they get south of that driver bed, they head feet wet. So I got an Army helicopter crew rescuing a Marine helicopter crew. We got Air Force Sandys sitting on top, kind of orchestrating the mission. And they go straight out to a Navy hospital ship because the guy who's burned is only going to live when we get him to, that's what they're concerned. They stayed overnight. They didn't think he could live through it. So that's just, and now we come off of that. Maz and I join up. It's dark, but we're headed back to Da Nang, feeling pretty good that we got these guys out. And maybe we didn't know what the word joint back then meant, but a real joint mission. Maz joins up on my right side. He says, "Hey, you're looking good over here." He swings back under, comes over to my left side, and he says, "Oh my gosh, you look like Swiss cheese over here." And so that was the time I was 200 plus holes in the airplane, and we both come back to land at Da Nang. And that was a typical, that was a search and rescue. It was just, you do what you had to do. You got so many others that are playing in this. So there's a Kingbird who was the airborne command and control, and they're giving you information back from headquarters in Saigon. If there were strikes that need to be put in, if you had target specific F4s, 105s, you name it, they were made available. You had facts. If you need them, they could come on scene and put in airstrikes. I mean, it was clear to me in my whole year that if an American was shot down, we're going to rescue that American. And the war would come essentially to a standstill from an air standpoint until we got that American out, or we couldn't find him.
Well, thanks for sharing. And that again is one of 13 that were successful that you did. No telling how many in total there. But I want to bring this up because you and I talked a little bit about this, and then we'll get on to some of these questions that are coming into the chat side of it. And I apologize, I cannot see the question, but I can see the chat on there. But we have a couple of folks in here who can relay those questions to us. One thing I wanted to bring up, you were at this point in your career, and so many of the folks who are listening tonight were right there with you at this. The end of World War II, we saw this just unbelievable spike in technology that came as a result. I mean, the airplane you were flying could carry more bombs and bullets than a B-17, right. which was, right there with it at the end of World War II. But talk to me about what that was like as a young pilot. You trained, I believe this was actually a question, but you trained, as you said, on some of the early jets, and then here you were flying a recip. But talk to me about what it was like in the Air Force back then, as you saw all of this technology come along, and some of the lessons that you learned, maybe from a leadership perspective, on what it was like to keep up with that incredible amount of change that happened so quickly.
Well, Matt, I think you're exactly right. We saw a huge technology change in our Air Force, and maybe in our entire military structure throughout the 50s, certainly 60s and 70s. coming off of World War II. The airplane I flew had been actually built at the very end of World War II, never saw service. So it was kind of like flying, being in an aircraft that was still from the old day, but had been built to be even better than, as you compare the B-17. Smaller airframe, and yet I could carry a lot more ordnance than what the B-17 carried. Now, I'll tell you, the A-1 is not a small airplane. When you get up next to it, it's a big airplane for a single seat fighter, but it was certainly not in the bomber class. Now, I trained at Laredo in the T-37 and the T-38, both jet airplanes. Yeah, I had a little bit of T-41 time just to get started. But then after going through jet pilot training, and most of our Air Force were in the modern jets of the day. I mean, the 104 was already being replaced. The 101, the F-100, those are being replaced as I came out of pilot training with the F-4. Even the 105 was close to being replaced. And those were pretty modern airplanes compared to our World War II or Korea days. So here I'm flying this old World War II airplane, but I'm in the modern new jet Air Force. I will say the Sky Raider, we didn't have GPS. There was no such thing then. We used a thing called ADF, Air Directional Finder. I mean, that's a real old version of a needle and magnet. When I saw technology was in the 70s, when I went from A1 and I then had a tour and training command, and then I went to fly the A7. Boy, then I really saw technology that our Air Force was adopting, and that was tremendously a modern airplane that was a forerunner to the F-16. And of course, I could talk forever about things like the F-16 and F-15 and where are we going today with the F-22 and the F-35? I mean, it's the leaps and bounds from my day in the A-1, certainly.
Well, I guess when you're seeing all of this, you have to keep up, and then the airmen have to keep up, who you eventually will lead in this time. And the technology of your era there in the Vietnam era is wonderful. But let's talk a little bit about those leadership lessons in hopes that some of the younger folks who are watching this, even in the future, will be able to hear this. What are your leadership lessons, General Brown, that you really want to get out there, that you would tell everybody who's watching this in the future?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's a team sport. Everybody has to play a role, and we may give the glory, and it seems like the accolades go to the guy in the cockpit. But I tell you, he's only as good as the crew chief that gets the airplane ready, as the refueling team and the armament team. And so first and foremost, and I didn't really see that. I guess I saw it, but I didn't really understand it as a lieutenant. I understood it a whole lot better when I came back into the A-70 F-16, and I saw the role that, whether it be the ops clerk in the squadron or the intel person preparing you to go face the enemy. You got to understand, appreciate, and include the whole team in the effort. I didn't appreciate that as a young person near as much as I did later. So as technology now increases, I think one of the things we have to discover and work with is, you got to stay on top. You got to stay engaged. You can't just, it's not a seat of the pants kind of business anymore. I think it kind of was back in the quote, the days of World War II, Korea, even somewhat Vietnam. It was a little bit of a seat of the pants kind of flying that we did. But that is not the case even into the 70s and the 80s, and certainly not today. I mean, our simulators are so tremendous now. I'm not going to preach that, sim time is like flying time. But we do have some tremendous simulators to get our guys ready. And so I would say staying on top of the game, understanding the new abilities that we used to do things with our hands that now are being done with screens and touch pads. And I couldn't get in a jet today. It's beyond me now. I hate to say that. I wish I could, but it's not the flying of it. It's the employment of it that is what really now drives these young jocks that are men and women that are doing a tremendous job for us.
You can't call tech support when you're up there. You got to know this stuff in and out, I guess. And
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying there. Was there ever a point in all of these close air support missions, you talk about the team and you talk about you just had to do whatever it took to get the job done. Was there ever a point in any of this where you thought, well, I might not get out of this?
Oh, there are 2 or 3 times when I remember one time on takeoff leg going out of NKP, my engine quit, and it just stopped dead. And I was right at the end of the runway. I hadn't raised the gear yet, so I mean I'm not too far off the end. I'm airborne. I haven't even raised the flaps. The flaps and the gear are still down. Engine just quits. And then within about a second or two, it starts right back up, but it's running real rough. It's burping and spitting, and it's not at all running like it should. I'd done the magneto check. I'd done all the right things before we took off. I immediately pull the power back. And as I pulled back on the throttle, it did run a little bit better, but of course I needed throttle. I raised the gear to get rid of drag. I let the flaps down to give me a lift. I gave it 1 or 2 second thought of, I'm going to have to jump out of this airplane. We had lieutenants, and I used to be one of those, sitting in the runway or supervisory of the RSU unit. Lieutenants got to pull RSU duty. And a fellow, Bob Carlson, is on the radio screaming on the mic, "Tex, bail out, bail out, bail out." Because he's heard the airplane quit and sees it disappear kind of over the horizon. Before I pulled the handle, because we did have we had an extraction system, which was 0-0, kind of like an injection, but slightly different. I reached down and pulled handles that would get rid of all the ordnance and the external fuel tanks. I had to wait a second or two because right at the end of the runway is a village, and I was right over the village. So I was like, eased past the village. I'm still descending. I pull back on the 2 handles we got that get rid of all the, an airplane. I feel like I'm in an elevator. I feel like the airplane went up about 200 feet, just like that. And at that moment, because the next was go for the handle. The airplane's on past the village, just let it, and I'll just get out. I thought I might be able to still fly this airplane. So I tried to add a little bit of power. It would give me a response, but then if I got very far up, it would start spitting. So I kept it back at about probably, let's say instead of 100%, I'm at 70% power. But I'm very lightweight. And so I get on the radio and I make this very calm call that says, NKP Tower, this is Sandy 7. I've got a little in trouble. I'm going to have to turn around and land. At least that's what I think I said. Bob Carlson, the guy in RSU, he says, "Brown, you came in." NKP Tower, this is Sandy 7, and I got a bad engine. I'm coming back. So I guess I was a little excited. I thought I would have to jump out of that one. I didn't. I end up putting in about 15 degrees, 20, 30 degrees of bank, and I'm losing altitude again. So now I've got about 50, and I just ease my way. I think I'm going to land back against traffic. No way. I get way out of a wide pattern, but I come back around, land the airplane, get it on the deck, pull it off at the end. I'll never forget. Okay, and again, I'm a young lieutenant, and here comes the chief of maintenance for the whole wing, and he's in his 1505s. That's an old uniform we had before the light blues. And he pulls up in his pickup truck. I'm still sitting off in the arming area at the end of the runway. He tries to climb up my wing. He falls back down once or twice because there's so much oil on the side of the thing. He finally gets his way up there. And I've got the cockpit back. He sticks his head in my face and starts screaming at me, "What have I done to his airplane?" And I just, lieutenant to the colonel, I respectfully say, I just tried to come back and save it. Well, he beats me up a little bit. He finally climbs back and gets in his truck and goes away. And I shut it down. They take me into debrief. An hour later, that same colonel walks into the op squadron, and he's got a quart glass bottle, a little bit bigger than this, full of fuel. Half the bottle got sand in it. And he said, I was the first airplane to take off that morning. And they went and inspected. We found 8 other airplanes out of our fleet of maybe 24, 26 airplanes that somebody had gone through our fence line, gotten to our revetments, had poured sand into 8 of our airplanes' fuel tanks. And it took the revving up of the engine to full power before the sand came out of the bottle and got into the system. And then, so I thought I was going to have to jump out of that airplane or die with it, because I'm probably like most guys. The cockpit it's a cocoon. It's you feel like you're safe here. I think it'd be difficult. I've never jumped out of an airplane, but I think it'd be tough to do that, because the comfort of the cockpit is maybe too much to where you stay in it too long. I stayed in that one almost too long, but was able to bring it back.
That's a wonderful story, though, about what you hear from all the guys over the years of doing interviews just like this. Fly the airplane as far as you can and into the crash. As the late, great Bob Hoover used to say, fly that airplane, don't fall the airplane. How many times have we all heard that? But what is it like going from, I fly tailwheel airplanes and all that kind of stuff, but here you are in this modern Air Force, and now you have all this airmanship. And I'm sure there's some other Skyraider pilots in here watching tonight. You've got all this airmanship that really had been forgotten at that point. I mean, when you went through pilot training, flying T-37s and T-38s, nobody had rudder skills like you did in that Skyraider.
Well,
I mean, what was it like walking into the fighter bar and here you are flying a Skyraider, and you were leaps and bounds as far as an airman with airmanship, I would imagine, ahead of some of these guys. But
it was actually a pretty neat feeling to go even later wearing an A1 patch. There's a mystique and an honor to the Skyraider that those that had a chance to fly it. And there's a lot before me that flew it. And at one time we had, I don't know, 300 A1 Skyraiders in Vietnam at one time. Maybe not that many, but at least a couple of hundred. Now, it was an airplane that we lost a lot of airplanes because we were down in amongst them.
Right.
At the end, when I got there, they'd been 6 or 8, 9 different squadrons at one point. And then we kept having losses over the years. We finally got down to 3 squadrons. They consolidated the last 2 squadrons into one giant squadron of 36 airplanes. And I arrived in October of '71, right after that consolidation. And we were all in NKP Thailand. Now we flew alert sorties out of Da Nang, Bien Hoa, Ubon, other places, but the squadron was located in KP. 36 airplanes when I arrived. I left 1 year later, and we were down to 18. So it was an airplane that it had a mystique to it. And yeah, I got to tell you, when I later, whether it be in training command or back in the fighter world, Sky Raider guys were kind of given a pat on the back, and man, I did have a lot of guys say, wish I could have flown that old tail dragger. But the concept of flying a tail dragger goes back to I mean, for me, it's the P-51 that I never got to fly, that I would go, man, I'd give anything to fly P-51, because that would have been the mystique that I looked to. But
I know a couple of P-51 pilots that said they'd sure like to fly a Sky Raider. So
yeah, well,
I think you're in good company there.
Yeah, those are two great airplanes. Yeah.
We've got just a few minutes left here, and I want to open it up to some questions. But before we get into the questions, I just want to hear from you. I know you're a man of deep faith. Grew up the son of a pastor, and wonderful career in the Air Force, and a very successful career. But at the end of it, when it's all said and done, what do you want people to remember about you, about Tex Brown, when you're somewhere far away from here? What do you want them to remember about you?
Well, I would hope that they'd remember that I loved people. I was really, I mean, I love flying airplanes. What I really loved was bringing the people together, the camaraderie of the squadron. I love picking out guys in the squadron and let's go make a sports team. So even at NKP, but there were some intramurals going on, but our first SOS wasn't doing much. Well, I said, come on, guys, we're a bunch of jocks. I know we can play some ball. So we ended up getting a softball team. And then we had a football team and a basketball. I had a guy come in who was about 6'5", TQ McCammon. I think he'd been an All-American in college somewhere. I mean, in basketball. Wow, we're going to have a basketball team. So I love bringing guys together, not only on the flight line, but in the squadron or off duty. Now, when you're a captive audience, like we were for a year in NKP, and your families aren't there, well, then it's pretty easy to bring guys together and do stuff besides just flying sorties. But I've tried to do that even later in squadron command or wing command. Get folks that, when I was the head of personnel for the entire Air Force, I got to go out and speak a lot. I'd go to a wing and we're going to go give the personnel message to the air, and it's always, yeah, I'm going to tell us what you're going to do to us. Well, I wanted our message to be that we care about people, and we care about where you want to go and what you want to do next. Now the Air Force system cannot let every single person just go where just they want to go. Somebody has to go to Kunsan. Somebody has to go to Al-Udeid. We got a mission to do. But when you explain and help folks understand the needs of the mission, but we were going to take when I took command of the personnel center, I told the folks there, who are a whole bunch of personnelists, and I love the personnel world, but it can get very focused and very lose sight of a big picture. I remember telling them when I took command, we're going to put the word personal into personnel. It's really not embedded in it. They come from the same root, but we're going to be personal about what we do. So I would say what I would want folks to remember me about the Air Force is I try to be personal. I try to have relationships. I wanted people to feel good about coming to work in our Air Force and serving our country. What I want to remember about Vietnam era would be that no man was left behind. And I really saw that in the rescue business. If an airman was down of any variety, again, Air Force, Navy, Marine, Army, the war would stop because we're going to do everything we can to rescue that American. I believe that's part of the no man left behind concept. And we have that in our Air Force, just like we do in the ground forces.
Well, that's great. Well said. If you want to hit the chat button right now, you can do that. It's right down there at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, we have just a few minutes left here, and we can take a couple of questions from General Brown. I started it off talking about the guitar and your foray into music there with Red-Blooded All-American. But would you share that quick story we talked about just at the beginning there a little bit? We were laughing about all the guitars in the back there and asking if you wanted to open with a song. But
Yeah,
you had a time in the music business, we'll call it, where you actually talked about building teams, and then here you were out there singing with some friends. I just think that's a great way.
well, Matt, you're right. I grew up a preacher's kid, and my dad had actually been a professional singer. After he came back from being a Navy officer in World War II, he got into singing, and he was singing with the Old-Fashioned Revival Hour, Dr. Charles Fuller, Old-Fashioned Revival Hour Quartet. When Dr. Fuller decided to start a seminary, and he convinced my dad he should be in that seminary. So he left the quartet to go to seminary to become a pastor, and the rest is history. But Dad always had a great voice, sang a lot, had a whole lot of quartet music. Well, I inherited that from Dad. And so in many places, especially whatever setting we're in, again, I told you my wife's an organist, pianist in our church everywhere we go. Well, I usually would sing in the choir, and I'd often put a quartet together if I could find 3 other men that could sing tenor, lead, and baritone. Well, actually, one time in our fighter squadron at Han, we heard a fella who was considered the singing fighter pilot of Vietnam, and he came over to entertain, and he had written the song because he had just checked out in the F-16 with the South Carolina Guard. And he wrote a song called Red-Blooded All-American Boys. And it's about flying the F-16. It's a great song. It kind of it puts down the F-15 a little bit, but that's part of the F-16, F-15 rivalry. Well, a bunch of us at Han heard this song, and we got to learn this song. So we're sitting around singing it, and then turns out as I look around, I'm the squadron commander, and I got a lieutenant who's a music major. He actually ended up being a fighter weapons school grad. I mean, this guy's a great pilot, but he's a music major in college. Another one that sang in his church choir is baritone. And another young fella played the guitar and had a great tenor voice. So we start picking around, and we take this song, put it to 4-part harmony, and we started singing it both at our squadron. We sang it in front of the wing commander. He just dropped dead over it, and then he put us on the map. I mean, we end up finding ourselves going down and singing this song for 4 stars and 3 stars, and any visiting VIPs. The wing commander is going, Brown, get your quartet. I got this VIP coming. You got to come entertain. Yes, sir. So,
make it personal, right? I mean, that's what you were talking about right there. So you get to know the guys and gals that you serve with, and you make it personal. I'm just looking through the questions here. We don't have a whole lot. Somebody wanted to know if you did you ask to go to ATC to be an IP?
No, in fact, my feet were dragging, and there were heel marks all the way into Air Training Command. I mean, I was coming out of Vietnam. I went there as a second lieutenant. I came home as a first lieutenant. And I'm a combat warrior, you know. I can't go be an IP. I want to put me in the F4 or the A, whatever. We didn't have an A10 yet, and so I didn't ask to go to ATC. I slew smartly and went. I did say, well, at least put me in a 38. Nope, they put me in a 37. So I spent 4 years flying a T-37. I got 1,000 hours in the tweet. And, I mean, I loved the mission because you're really teaching guys to fly. It's interesting. I went to Laredo. That's where I'd come from. They closed down before I could actually become a operational IP. I was at pit in Randolph when they announced the closure, and it was a fast closure. The radar got announced and it was closed within about 3 or 4 months. So those of us in PIT were given a first shot at where to, and I ended up going to Shepherd, which was a great assignment. I never flew with an American student in 4.5 years of being a 37 IP. All I ever flew were foreign students. I was in the security assistance program, flying with Vietnamese for the first 2 years. And then when Vietnam fell in 75, the program came to a stop and we picked up Iranian students. So I flew with Iranians for 2 more years and never had an American student in all my training. And then I went to the A7 and the rest was flying fighters.
Well, I think it's great. I really appreciate you sharing some of these stories tonight. If there aren't any other questions, we'll just make one quick announcement that I wanted to make sure we got out. May the 11th through the 13th, there's a big welcome home event for all of the Vietnam vets right there on the DC Mall and the Air Force Historical Foundation, a group that General Brown has certainly been a part of for a long time, is going to be there. So come out if you can and say welcome home. And again, as General Holmes mentioned at the start of this, Colonel Fred Watkins will be talking about the F-105 on 19 July. That's going to be a fun time. Any last second questions? If you want to throw them on the chat session, the chat window right there, we can do it. It's at the bottom of your screen. We've got about another minute or two left here, but thanks for doing this tonight.
Well, Matt, thank you. And as we wait for a possible question, I'll tell one short rescue story it's fairly famous, and it involves not just me, a whole bunch of guys, but the rescue of who's the guy down 21 days?
There's a couple of folks talking, saying
senior moment. Roger Locker. Roger Locker had been an F-4 backseater, shot down in I think it's sometime in June at 72. He bails out and lands on Thud Ridge, which is north of Hanoi. He escaped and evades for 21 days. And his story is an unbelievable story. And Roger Locker is a great American. But he finally comes up on voice on his radio because he intentionally moved at night, just bedded down in jungle during the day, and he made his way off of Thud Ridge, north and east, almost over to an airfield called Yen Bai, which was in the very far eastern part of North Vietnam, well above Laos, so away from Hanoi. He comes up on voice and says, "Hey, it's me. What was this call sign? Not Oyster. Oyster 02 Bravo, we'll say." And at first it was Oyster 02 Bravo. That call sign didn't exist. That hadn't existed for 20 days. Well, it's me. It's really me. And so Sandy's get scrambled. There must be 14 of us. I end up being, one day I was Sandy 7 on one mission. The next day I flew again. The next day we got him the second day. I think I was Sandy 14. We have series and series of Sandys. We had to take Jolly Greens, refuel them in the air over the northern part of Laos. We couldn't take tankers into North Vietnam. And then the Jollies have to hit the deck. We get that guy out. It was one of the greatest rescues ever. And Roger Locker is just one of the great Americans, as he was down 21 days, escaping and evading and making his way out of being captured and coming home.
Well, again, thank you for being here. General Holmes, do you have anything as we wrap this back up here for the Air Force Historical Foundation?
Thank you, Matt. As always, you did a great job. Tex, we really appreciate it. Tex's daughter is retiring from the Air Force tomorrow. His son-in-law is getting ready to go be the ops group commander at Kunsan. Like many of us, it runs in the family. And so they live around the corner here, so we're able to do this in person and have dinner. Thanks, everybody who tuned in. Tell your friends. Our next one will be in July, and we hope we'll see you over on the National Mall as we welcome the Vietnam veterans back.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.